pleasure to introduce Tom Casten.
Thank you, Rob. It's a great pleasure to be back here. And the call to action. Let's start out very quickly with the energy carbon story and the history of access to energy services. I would submit to you that our standard of living depends on access to energy services. Heat, power, mechanical energy. That's what makes our life different from our ancestors. And until very recently, Homo sapiens just depended on metabolic energy. It's only 100,000 years ago that we figured out how to tame fire. 10,000 years, we domesticated animals and they started concentrating energy for us. 5,000 years ago, first power from wind, 2,000 water. But the more recent thing is the use of ancient sunlight, where we start using photovoltaic or photosynthesis. 1760 was the first serious use of coal. 1859 oil was discovered, 1885 natural gas, and then 1909 the IDEA came along looking for a more efficient way to do it. The access to energy services, I would submit, allowed the population of the world to explode. This is the population of the world, and you can see that it's grown rather dramatically, almost a flat line up until just before the time of Christ. And then what really took off was James Watt's steam engine allowed us to start converting coal into mechanical power. Others would argue that it really was the formation of the IDA. But it's somewhere in there, those two things have caused a very, very unsustainable trend of population rising like a rocket ship, showing no signs of coming out. Now, this leads to a couple other problems, and it's pretty scary. We look from 1850 to the present at the population, and we can see it's up 430%. Population has more than quadrupled during the lifetime of IDEA. What people don't realize is that the energy consumption per capita, this is the raw energy, not the energy use, has gone up by 760%. Now, this is the whole world. This counts the Somalians and the Bangladeshis, as well as the people that chose their parents better and live in a nice country like we live in. When you put that all together, you have the total energy consumption in the last 150 years has risen by 4,600%. Ladies and gentlemen, I am showing you the definition of unsustainable. Look at what's happened over the history of IDEA. Virtually all the energy that we're consuming in the world has happened in this 100 years that we're going. Now let's take that to another particular point of view. During the first 100 years of IDEA, 90% of human greenhouse gas emissions occurred. As a matter of fact, it's kind of surprising to people that since 1979, 1/2 of the greenhouse gases ever emitted by humankind have been emitted. Since 1979. That's the time anybody here in the room. And if you look at when the IDA was formed, 90% of those greenhouse emissions have happened since then. You read about all this stuff and you think that there's some scientific controversy and this and that and the other. Just look at the data. Just look at the data. The climate change is occurring much faster than predicted. Every prediction of 10 years ago about what was going to happen has been wrong on the low side. Everything bad that could happen is happening faster than we said it would happen. The feedback effects are occurring in ways that the models never fully anticipated. We're just about to have open passage across the Arctic. Melting ice caps, rising sea levels, increasing ocean acidity. The coral reefs as we know them are finished. If you want to enjoy coral, get out there now because it's gone, folks. There is going to be no more coral. It's way too late to stop it. All of the marine species that come around that. As a matter of fact, the growing species extinction in the world is at 1,000 times the background rate. This is the 5th major species extinction in the history of the world, and this one's being caused by us. So I said that there's a silver bullet, and I'm going to go right to it. Let's look at the generation story. Electricity generation is the largest source of CO2 in the United States. These numbers are comparable in other places. In 1950, it was 11% of the CO2. Today, it's 40%. And that curve is going to continue to rise as we electrify vehicles and continue to electrify and so forth. So if you're going to do something about any problem, you want to follow the Willie Sutton thing. When, you know, there's a bank robber, and when they got him in front of the judge says, "Why do you rob banks?" And he says, "Because that's where the money is." Well, if you're going to do something about CO2, you're going to have to attack where the money is, which is electric generation. As a matter of fact, the generation of heat and power, 42% and 27%, represents 69% of the fossil emissions, and the efficiency of both have been flat for 50 years. We have all kinds of conversations about automobiles and changing this technology and that technology. We just continue to focus away from where the problem is. The problem is in generation of heat and power. That is where the silver bullet lies. Look at the electric generation. The U.S. delivered electricity efficiency started at about 6% back in 1900. It rose through the period of World War I, World War II. Finally, after World War II, by the time Eisenhower was still in the White House, it got up to 33%. And it has remained at 33% ever since, in spite of unbelievable technological developments. This is not caused by a lack of technology. It's caused by vested interests maintaining policies that support what they want to be supported rather than what's good for the world. Period, end of story. Every kid knows that a power plant puts out a tremendous amount of waste heat because they watch The Simpsons. That's a nuclear plant in the front, but what you really see is the big cooling towers. They say, "Okay, Tom, don't use cartoons. This is a serious conversation. Let's use a real plant." Craig, Colorado, taken on a cold morning, and what you see is all that heat coming out of the cooling tower. That plant has been pumping away since before 1950, and it takes 2/3 of all the fuel that it puts out and uses it to warm the heat at warm the air at Craig, Colorado. Not particularly useful. Generation efficiency. That's the elephant in the room. That is the silver bullet. Nobody talks about it. We put all kinds of policies into doing everything else and ignoring this because most of the energy industry makes its money on this inefficiency, and they don't like to change the rules. And those of us that have tried to do CHP over the last 30 years know that all too well. Let's look at a little picture and explain this better. You start out with 100 units of fuel. You put it in a central power plant, and as you've just seen on the picture, you throw 65% of it away. That's smart. Very clever. Then you run it through a long set of wires, and you waste another 2% of it, which is really 9% of what gets produced. And finally, this all gets out to useful power of 33%. And these are data good for 1960 as well as 2009. It's really handy. I don't ever have to revise this graph. It's just always the same. Let's try another way. Let's take that same 100 units of fuel and go put it in a series of small plants that combine heat and power. What does that mean, combine heat and power? You take the heat that you were throwing away and put it in a pipe, like in Elwood, Indiana, 100 years ago, and you run it to somebody and avoid a boiler. Now what happens? You've still got waste heat, 33%, but you're recycling a lot of the waste heat, bringing it back. You have no line losses because when you have local power plants, you don't need long wires that waste all the energy. You still need long wires to connect us, but you get very few line losses when the power goes right next to the guy. Over to the user, you've got 33% useful thermal energy, 33% useful electric energy, and you're up to 66. You have doubled the efficiency. What do you mean there's no silver bullet? We know how to do this. Why don't we do it? Well, that's the IDA role. Your job is to recycle the waste heat. If you're just boiling water and sending it through a steam pipe, you're not doing your job. Your job is to get the cogen plant built so that what you're really sending out to people is heat that would have otherwise been thrown away. Then you're doing your job, and then it starts to make some sense.